Good morning, students. Welcome to today's lesson on methods of teaching biology. In today's lesson, we are going to learn about Bloom's taxonomy. Now, the learning or the session objectives or instructional objectives. So, by the end of this session, you'll be able to 1. Identify the hierarchies of learning as propounded by Bloom. 2. State objectives to cover the various hierarchies. Okay, so this is Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive development. Now, learning outcomes can be classified into 3 broad domains. We have the cognitive domain, we have the affective domain, and then the psychomotor domain. Now, the cognitive domain involves the behavior that is related to knowledge or mental processes. So, the affective domain is concerned with the perception of interest, feelings, attitude, and values. And then with the psychomotor, that one focuses on the skills that require coordinated movements of body parts. So in this session, we are going to look at one aspect of a learning outcome, which is cognitive domain. So these levels are hierarchical, meaning that they increase in complexity as one moves upward. So from the lower level, we have the knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and then evaluation. So this is the Bloom's cognitive domain. So you can see that we have 6 levels of cognitive development. Okay, so with the Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive domain, moving from the simplest level or the lowest level, we begin with knowledge, which is the lowest level. Now, with knowledge is the lowest or simplest of the levels in the cognitive domain. So, knowledge level objectives or learning outcomes deal with remembering previously learned content. So the knowledge level involves recall of definitions, facts, and basic concepts. So that is why as teachers, whenever we are teaching, it is necessary for always to do relevance previous knowledge. So when you are able to do that, or when you do that, you build on what students know to teach the topic. So assuming you are coming to teach digestion, and then relevance previous knowledge will be students have taken in diet or breakfast before coming to school, and that one will serve as a relevance previous knowledge. Okay. So some verbs that depict knowledge level outcomes. So some verbs you see when a question is being asked, or when you ask a question, or when you want to ask a question to test the knowledge level of a student, you can use verbs like define, list, state, name, mention, among others. So these are the verbs you can use to measure the knowledge level of a student. Now the next question is about comprehension. Comprehension. Now with comprehension, it involves behaviors that show understanding of facts and principles, and then interpretation of materials. So when you give students questions to answer, the way they will interpret the questions, the way they will put information together will enable you, the teacher, to know the comprehension level of the student. So we are saying that it requires grasping of meaning and translating knowledge to interpret learned material. And then an example of verbs used in measuring comprehension is describe, interpret, explain, discuss. You say discuss the circulatory system or describe how breathing occurs. So all these things are comprehension. You are trying to know the comprehension level of the students. Now, the next one is application. Apply, application. So when you have been able to understand the concept, the next step is to use, or the next step to use is application. So application involves transfer of knowledge to new situations. So you've taught students a topic, assuming you taught them malaria or diseases and their causative organisms. And then one is malaria, which is a disease. So you are trying to see whether students were able to apply their knowledge in the topic you taught. So he asked a question that, assuming a man has been seeing mosquitoes in his house, and then at the back of the man's house there is a stagnant water there. So as a student, how will you explain to the man why mosquitoes are in his house? And then in which way can you help solve the problem of breeding mosquitoes? You've taught students the outbreak of malaria. You've taught them how malaria occurs, the life cycle, the stages of mosquito breeding, and all that. So students should be able to apply their knowledge on what you've taught them. So an example of verbs measuring application are demonstrate, illustrate, construct, show. So all these verbs are very necessary to measure the application level of a student. Now, the next stage of Bloom's cognitive domain is analysis. So at this stage, it is the ability to break down material into its component parts. So when you're able to analyze a question or analyze the situation to come up with a solution or analyze an information to explain to people who lacks knowledge in that area, then it means your analysis level is very high. So at the analysis stage, it involves establishing relationships and then connections. So examples of verbs like examine, classify, distinguish, analyze, all these are verbs used at the analysis stage. Now, the next stage, the last but one stage, is the synthesis. Synthesis. Now, synthesize means to produce. To synthesize means to produce. So it is the ability to bring parts together to form a new whole. So when you're able to pick out parts, when students are able to pick out parts to synthesize certain things from the teachings or from the teaching and learning activity, then it means that they are synthesized, or the level of synthesizing is high. So at the synthesis, it involves reorganizing and creating ideas in new ways. So how can you synthesize from what your teacher have taught? How can you synthesize from what I'm teaching you? An example of verbs used in asking questions is compose, design, create, arrange. So when you ask questions using these verbs, that means you want students to synthesize from the question, to synthesize what you've taught them. And the last stage of Bloom's cognitive domain is evaluation. Evaluation. So at this stage, it is the ability to judge the value of material for a given purpose. So the verbs used at this stage is justify, critique, compare, contrast, etc. So when you ask questions by using justify or critique or compare or contrast, it means you are trying to know the evaluation level of the student, whether the student understood what you taught or they didn't, or you have to remediate the whole lesson again. We've learned a lot in this session. So in reviewing what we've learned, I asked you these questions. Identify the hierarchies of learning as propounded by Bloom. State objectives to cover the various hierarchies. So in finding answers to these questions, most often I advise students to have a discussion on the question and then find answers to that. So in doing that, you can have a discussion on any available e-learning platform, either on Zoom or Google Meet.